think about your idea and you figure out who your target market is, go out and talk to them, and not people that know you. People who are friends and family are going to be predisposed to encourage you.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of the Inventive Journey. I am your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several businesses to 7 and 8 figures, as well as founded Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. And today on the podcast, we have another great journey to tell with Michael Malone. Just to give a quick introduction to Michael, so he spent most of his life as an Army officer. Unfortunately, in about 2017, suffered a traumatic brain injury that kind of ended his career, and he'll talk a little bit more about that. And kind of from that, having to deal with some of the impairments and injuries that come along with that, decided both to make come up with a product that make his life and others that have similar conditions suffering from that, making their lives better. And so that's what he's now doing today. So we'll hear a little bit more about his journey. And welcome to the podcast, Michael.
Thank you, Devin. It's great to be on your podcast. I appreciate this opportunity.
So I gave a brief introduction, but I'm sure that there's a lot more detail to tell. So maybe if you wanted to walk us through a bit of your journey, kind of starting when you're the Army officer and what led up to where you're at today.
Sure. So I ended up spending 32 years in the military. I love doing it, supporting the country. I was in Iraq in 2015 and 2016 and became extremely ill and was medevaced back to Walter Reed Military Hospital in the Maryland area. And while I was there, I suffered a traumatic brain injury. And, you never think about that until it actually happens. And after the injury, I spent about a week in the hospital. And when I got out of the hospital, I spent the next 3 years recovering, working on my speech and physical therapy several times a week, speech therapy, occupational therapy. And one of the things I noticed was I just couldn't remember stuff. My wife would tell me something and 10 minutes later, it was like we never had that conversation. And people don't realize how frustrating it is to go through your life and not remember the morning or remember yesterday, remember interactions with people, and how we connect with someone is through those interactions and those memories of those interactions. And so I found myself isolating while I was in treatment. I just wouldn't interact with people. And my wife's like, you got to get out. And I wouldn't go out unless she was there with me to allow her to cue me when somebody was going to approach and tell me how I knew that person. And, occupational therapy is like, well, I'll use these 10 apps to manage your life. And I've downloaded a bunch of different apps to try to get through things. And every app had a different interface. It was just really hard for me to understand what was going on. And I thought there should be a better way, and I just couldn't find it. And I convinced my wife to let me take some of my our life savings, and invest it into this process. I had talked to hundreds of my other fellow service members that had suffered traumatic brain injuries in service, either through explosions or rollovers in vehicles or airborne injuries, and trying to understand what their problems were and how they aligned with mine. And
just to dive in really quick, and don't mean to interrupt your journey.
Yeah.
If I remember right, when we talked a little bit before about the podcast, and the one thing I thought, I made probably the erroneous assumption that the brain injury necessarily came directly from the military, right? In the sense of the years of service. If I remember right, it was on a bike or riding, competitive bike riding or competitive bike accident. Is that right?
Yeah, so the irony is I was at Walter Reed recovering for an illness, and part of that recovery was adaptive sports. So I have a couple injuries from service, where I
Mm.
have a spinal injury and an injury to my right leg.
Mm.
And so part of that recovery was getting into adaptive cycling. And when I was in the cycling, I had a high-speed crash, and that put me in the hospital for a week. Before, I had an airborne injury where I suffered my first brain injury, but that wasn't really, I recovered pretty well from that.
Mm.
Unfortunately, every time you knock your head, it's not a linear problem, right? You don't
Mm.
lose just a little more. Sometimes you just kind of fall off the cliff and you lose a lot more.
Mm.
And so, it's less about how, I'm fortunate that I didn't get blown up. So I don't have a lot of the other issues associated with a lot of my buddies, like that have amputations and shrapnel in their body. So I've been very fortunate in my service. But, brain injury. Some of my friends have brain injuries because they've had tumors, cancer tumors, and they had to have them removed. And when those tumors were removed, they removed part of the healthy brain too, right?
Mm.
Because they have to get all that tumor out as much as possible. And so that causes cognitive impairment. And so your issue with memory is pretty significant.
If I
And
sorry, jumping back, and I think those are all, first of all, I think one thing to talking with you that I thought was interesting is I didn't think about, and never, just one of those things I never thought about, all the different ways that brain injuries can happen, right? Whether it's military service, which is what I always automatically jump to, and this is related in the sense that you were trying to work on some of the injuries that you served while in the military that ended up, or creating a different issue. But then also, we're talking about whether it's people that are having a tumor or having other impairments or getting an automobile accident, or a number of different ways. And so there are a lot of different people, or a lot of different causes, or people dealing with this are based on different things. But one thing I thought was interesting when you talked a little bit before is you said you had a crash, you broke your helmet. I think you said you got scarred your face, but you don't remember it. But you got back up and kept riding the bike, and then collapsed and took yourself to the ER. Or remind me how that went, because I thought it was interesting that you had your crash, but then you got up and you finished the race and then crashed again and then had to go to the ER, and that's kind of where it all came, or kind of came full circle.
yeah, so I was going about 28, 29 miles an hour, and unbeknownst to me, I had lost some tire pressure in my front tire. And so
Mm.
when I was taking a curve pretty aggressively, the front tire slipped out, and I face planted apparently into the concrete, slid into the sidewalk, and flipped up over the sidewalk.
Mm.
Um, so I remember hitting the ground hard, and I don't really remember anything else. This is all stories that have been told to me, but apparently there was a service member there that was, helping out with the course. And I asked him if my bike was okay, and he's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, help me get back on it. And so apparently I got back on my bike
Mm.
and finished the race, and I didn't realize like blood was pouring down off my face. And when I got to the end, like apparently I crashed again at the end of the finish line because I guess I couldn't figure out how to stop. And so they called the ambulance, and the next memory I have is waking up in the emergency room with the doctor asking me if it's okay to cut off my clothes. And I'm like I hurt everywhere. Like I'm in so much pain. Like,
Mm.
you feel free to cut off my clothes. I can get new clothes, but like I don't understand what's going on.
Fix whatever's wrong, because your
Yeah.
clothes are not that important. Yeah, exactly.
And so I ended up being a week in the emergency in the hospital, um, trying to recover from, so I could get released and go back into managed treatment at Walter Reed. And so, falls and sports accidents cause a lot of brain injuries in the general population, along with auto accidents and motorcycle accidents. So, surprisingly, my type of accident is very common outside the military.
Mm.
And even in the military, there's a lot of um, sports related injuries and auto and motorcycle related injuries. So
So
we just have the added benefit of having, being blown up and, hitting our heads bad when we fall out, when we jump out of perfectly good airplanes.
Well, so now you wake up in the hospital and what was the progress? I mean, was it an automatic, hey, I now I don't know, I realize that I don't remember things, or was it kind of, slow progression of, hey, somebody keeps talking about things and I can't remember, or kind of how did you get to the point you're saying, hey, now, something is different here? And then we'll certainly jump into kind of now with that realization, how you then came up with the solution that, that's the current project.
Yeah, I mean, the week I was in the hospital, I was in pretty rough shape.
Mm,
So I wasn't really like, I don't really remember that week at all. Um, you know, I noticed when I was released from the hospital and I was back at Walter Reed,
mm,
like I had a hard time. It feels, I didn't notice it right away, but then I just fell off this cognitive cliff where, I couldn't find words to speak.
mm,
Couldn't remember how to take my medications, which medications I needed to take. I was exhausted all the time. Just being awake was exhausting for me. And just not remembering what I had to do for the day, or, what conversations were going on. And when you're in a pretty tough space, you don't really realize what's going on. And so, my care team, my treatment team is the one that's like, hey, we need to get this, like, he clearly has a brain injury. We need to get him into, the brain injury group and get his treatment coordinated that way. And so the military is very good at integrated care,
mm.
surprisingly. And so that's, the people at Walter Reed got me into that integrated care for traumatic brain injury. And I ended up being there for about 3 years.
So, first of all, sorry to hear about the injury. I certainly feel for you. I couldn't even imagine going through that, and I'm sure that's tough. But I think that, interestingly, from that experience, now you're having to, first of all, go through that care, go through the program, get the treatment, and then once they're released, you still have to come home and you have to live, day-to-day life. You still have your wife, you have your family, and everything you're going on. And so then, it sounds like kind of from that, you're taking your experience of how do I now go back to kind of functioning and doing and living my life again, and that's the genesis of kind of where now you're at today with the product you're working on. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, when I was at Walter Reed, I'm like, oh God, like I want to become self-sufficient again. And I just couldn't. And my wife still is my daily caregiver and helps me out. And even though I'm creating an app to help me with my traumatic brain injury, it's very hard to do because it's hard. There's a lot of things that are going on, and it's hard for me to keep track of what is going on. So fortunately, I have a pretty good team of young guys and girls that are helping me in this journey for programming and marketing support and administrative support. And my wife, helps me all the time. It's like, okay, what do you have to do tomorrow? And helps me work through that. And when you have a brain injury, often the most important thing is what is going on today, and what's going on tomorrow, and how do I get through today, and what do I have to do to try to be successful for tomorrow. I'm not, when this thing popped up, it was a surprise to me that I had a podcast meeting. So I don't know.
Thank you for coming on.
I don't know when we set this appointment, right? But and so it pops up on my calendar, and then I'm like, oh, I don't have the link on my calendar like I normally do, right? So I try to put all the information in my calendar or put it in my app, and I just forgot. And maybe at the time I thought I was going to, and then 5 minutes later, that thought's no longer in my brain, and so it just never occurs again. And the app is all about how do I find things that I need to remember,
Hmm.
and how do I record things that I want to remember. So things that occurred in the past that I want to be able to look up, and things that are going to occur in the future that I want to be notified about and interact with in a positive way.
So if I were to do it, so app kind of has the twofold and if I'm putting words in your mouth, certainly stop
Yeah.
me, but you have, things, memories that you want to remember, whether it's, hey, my son scored and I'm making them up, but
Yeah.
son scored the winning football touchdown at this game, and I want to make sure to remember that and be able to kind of at least recall or have that as a conversation and take the notes of kind of my thoughts at the time. And then there are things that, hey, I need to get this done tomorrow, or day-to-day living and those type of things. And you want to also make sure the things that you need to get done that you capture. So it kind of serves those dual purposes. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's all about, like you were saying, the things that occurred in the past that you want to recall, for whatever reason, whether it's a family event, it's a work item, it's a hobby type item, it's an interaction with a person, which is great because I don't remember conversations with people, and so like I record those in the app, and then the things that I need to do. If I want to, I need to call the VA next week and reorder my medication. Normally, my wife does that, but I set it in my calendar in the app to remind me to do something like that. Or if I have a due out, I need to write a blog post, and I would set myself a due date for that, and then a bunch of reminders to remind me to do it. And normally, to be successful, I need to take action right when that reminder occurs, because I'm not going to remember it later, right? It could be there, and then someone could mention something to me, and then it's completely gone. And when you have a brain injury, people don't realize how much of a burden it is on the caregiver. My wife is a saint, because I'm hard to manage. It's super frustrating for her to tell me things and talk to me about stuff, and then later that day or the next day, it's like the conversation never occurred. And so she always has to be with me, to take care of me. Like I can't. I sometimes get lost. Like if I'm going to the store, I know where the store is when I started. I get to the store and then I can't figure out how to get home. Like I forgot where home is, and I like just have no idea. And so then I have to have my wife call me. I call my wife. I'm like, I don't know where I'm going. I'm at the store. Like, how do I get home? And then she'll have to tell me the address and help me spell it out so I can type it in, because I can't even, when that occurs, I can't even figure out how to spell words. So it's super frustrating. And, caregivers, caregiver burden is one of the things that I'm hoping the app helps alleviate. And what's going on with that. And then,
well, and one thing I thought you mentioned that was interesting, kind of along that lines, is for a lot of things that are interesting, but one of them was you mentioned not only it's kind of like and bad analogy, but I'll make the analogy anyway. Is it's kind of like the old commercials that you used to watch. And I don't think they're still on air anywhere. It was kind of like the Bald for Men, and not only am I the founder of the company, I'm also a user type of a thing.
right.
But and so bad analogy, but the point is I thought it was interesting when we talked. A lot of this, the way that you're troubleshooting it and helping the developers and helping the programmers is, hey, this isn't working for me, or hey, I can't, this fell apart, or this broke, right? Or this thing in the app I don't know how to use it. And I thought one that was even interesting that I think you brought up, and if I put words in your mouth again, stop me. But you're even saying, hey, we're used to like icons on a phone or icons on an app. And yet, we can remember and associate what that icon means. And yet, unless it's very self-evident what the icon means, if you don't remember and you can't remember, you don't even know where on the app to click. And so I thought it was interesting that you almost need that perspective of the user that's going through that in order to make things better and to make the app the product actually work for the intended audience.
Yeah, I mean, everybody likes icons, and I hate them. like like my interface designer on the template, he's like, well, I created an icon for every one of the templates. I'm like, okay, great. I'm glad you did that, but now remove them all.
Mm.
Like I don't need another 9 things to try to recall,
Mm.
because I'm not going to remember them, and I just want the word. And so we do use some icons in the app, but when we use the icon, there's always the word, the label.
Mm.
And one of the fixes that we are currently I'm trying to get the programmers to do, is like there's a way to filter data in the app.
Mm.
And in the new version, in the new interface design, but it doesn't say filter. And so when I go through the prototype, I'm like, how am I filtering it? They're like, well, you use these icons at the top. I'm like, well, I tried to use that icon, and I couldn't figure out how to create a memory using it. And they're like, well, it's a filter. And I'm like, well, that's all great, but at the time I was trying to use it, I was trying to create something. And
Mm.
so if it's a filter, then you need to tell me it's a filter.
Mm.
You know, it's, you can't just assume things. You know, one day it may be clear to me, and one day it may not be.
Mm.
I was trying to save something in the app, and for some reason I was exiting out of the memory, and I don't remember how I was, but I was so frustrated. And they're like, "Well, what are you doing?" I'm like, "I don't know. I'm being done." And I was using the back button on the phone. And
Mm.
so instead of clicking the save,
Mm.
the back button just canceled the memory.
Mm.
And like it didn't, there is a button that says save, but I couldn't grasp that I had to hit the save button. And so we ended up changing the flow of how the app works. So if you use the back button, it asks you, do you want to save? Do you want to cancel? Or do you want to just get rid of this memory?
Mm.
And you know, it's feedback like that from our beta testers
Mm.
that are helping us make this better. So I
I think
posted.
that I think that's, first of all, it's an awesome product, awesome mission. Sorry to hear the story, but I think it's great that you're saying, hey, I'm, rather than, and I'm sure that there was some of it, rather than wallow in self-pity or woe is me, let's see now how I can help myself, how I can help the caregiver, how I can help other people in a situation. And let's say I'm going to use my experience as a way to help other people. So I think that's a very admirable thing to do. So as we kind of now walk towards or wrap up towards the end of the podcast, I always ask a couple of questions, and you may or may not remember if we don't remember when we talked before. But so it may be even a more surprise than everybody else. But I'll ask you now anyway. So the first question I always ask is, what was the worst business decision you ever made?
All right. So I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm connected to a bunch of overseas developers.
Mm.
And so a couple times I tried using Indian companies and overseas, and it was like throwing money on the ground and lighting it on fire.
Mm.
So that was the worst business decision, and I did it not only once, I did it twice, because you know, maybe the first time's a fluke. And so if I needed to do that differently
Mm.
now, I would use a third-party contracting site, more like Upwork,
Mm.
Upwork.com, and that way there's some guarantees, right? If they don't deliver, you get your money back.
Mm.
And so so that, you know, I now use Upwork and 99 Design for all of my either design work or programming,
Mm.
if I was to outsource for like my website or something like that. Fortunately, I've been able to onboard some interns
Mm.
that were connected to me by you know, someone I met at a nonprofit organization, where I talked to them about what I was trying to do. And those interns have really brought the product along. We've still got some problems to solve, like security when we go to the cloud, but other than that, we're moving along. So worst decision,
Outsourcing
outsource.
to India.
Well, not just outsourcing in general without using a platform
Mm.
that provides guarantees,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
And so that, do that again.
Okay.
I would do
No,
that different.
I think that's something certainly to learn from, and I think that it's a good thing to know for people, because oftentimes you look at outsourcing, and it can be a good avenue, can save money, can or decrease and do it on a shoestring budget or on those type of things. But it is good to know that, hey, not all platforms are created equal, or not all people that you reach out to are going to do the same job. And so I think that's a good lesson learned. So okay, then the second question I always ask is, if you're to say somebody that wants to be an entrepreneur, just getting into a startup or small business, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
So when you think about your idea, and you figure out who your target market is, go out and talk to them, and not people that know you. People who are friends and family are going to be predisposed to encourage you. If you go I talk to random people that have brain injuries. I'm on several Facebook groups with people with traumatic brain injury. And, I posted a poll on Facebook the other day about some interface design, and 150 people responded, and that they, love the idea and look forward to it. And 30 of those joined my beta test group. So you got to find the people who are going to buy your service and see if they agree with what you think, and be open to what they say, because they may help you adjust what you're going to do to be more successful.
No,
and then, if I dovetail into that, ask them if they'll pre-buy it. However much, I want $1, will you give me $1 to reserve your spot? Right? And if people start giving you $1 then to reserve a spot, then you probably have something.
No, I think that's always a good question, especially, and it's not asking necessarily friends or family, because friends and family ask them to give you $1, they'll probably give you $1 just because they don't want to hurt your feelings. But I think that when you're saying, hey, when you're talking to a stranger and you tell them an idea, it always is very insightful when you say, now, will you pay for this now, or will you reserve it, or will you do it because we're building it? And if they hesitate or they hone up, then you say, okay, we need to do something different. Maybe we're not on, hitting on the market, and vice versa. Say, oh yeah, I would love that. Happy to reserve it. I think, I'm happy to do a pre-sale. Then it says, okay, there really is a demand in the marketplace. So I think that's a great thing, one is to get out and to talk with people. So I think you almost had two points. One, get out to talk with people, get their feedback, figure out what they want, how they can use it, if it's useful in the marketplace. And then two, ask for money, or ask for them to see if they'll actually pay for it. And both of them are very insightful. So I think those are both great points. So as we wrap up, and always plenty of things I wish we could talk on more, but as we wrap up, people want to, whether they're the caregiver, whether they're gone through traumatic brain injuries, whether they have, I think you might mention also Alzheimer and dementia and other cognitive health issues, or if they want to donate to your cause because they think it's a great cause, which I think it is, or they want to invest in your company because they think it's a great investment, what would be the best way to reach out, connect with you, and get linked up?
So the best way is to go to our website, we2link.com. And we have
and that's link.com, right?
Yeah, WE2link.com. And there's a button that says pre-register, and you could go in there and fill in your information and check the box whether or not you want to be in a beta test, or you want information, or fill out that form, and that'll come to us. And we do have the way to pre-purchase on the website. We're kind of working through the redesigning it because it's kind of clunky right now, but that is the best way to get a hold of us. And if you have a problem pre-purchasing on the website, if you send us an email through the form, we can work that out with you.
All right. And I think that when I looked at your website and went through, there's also a place that if you want to donate either to pre-purchase or just support the cause, you can also go there. So definitely invite everybody to go to the website. And that's, again, just for WE, so WE, the number 2, link.com. And whether it's to use a product, be beta testers, support them, donate, or anything else. So thank you for coming on the podcast. It was a fun episode to go through. It was a very interesting journey, and applaud you for the work you're doing. Thanks again for coming on. For those of you that want to be a guest on the Inventive Journey, feel free to go to inventivejourneyguest.com and apply to be on the podcast. We'd love to hear your journey. And if you're a listener, make sure to subscribe so you can get reminders to get this episode and future episodes. And certainly, if you need any help with patents or trademarks, feel free to reach out to us at Miller IP Line. We're always here to help. Thanks again, Michael. It was fun to have you on. It was great to talk to you, and wish you the best with We2Link. And I think it will be a raging success, and excited to hear the next phase of your journey.
All right. Thanks, Devin. Have a good day.